All right, now I'm going to show you how to build this entire component, which I call a plan component. So a plan component contains a card component with these elements, as well as a badge, a list, and a button. So back to our markup, here's our card component. I'm going to wrap this inside a div with a class of plan. So a plan consists of a card. Do you see that relationship? Great. So in this plan, in the header, we're going to have a bunch of elements: the name of the plan, the price, the billing cycle, a badge, and a description. So here in the header element, we're going to remove the text and add a bunch of elements. I'm going to use an H3 to represent the name of the plan, like entry. Now, why did I use an H3 here? Well, back to our design. Look, we have an H2 section, and in this section, we have different plans. Now, imagine we didn't have any graphics here, just plain text. So we have an H2 element. Below that, we have three H3 elements: entry, business, and business plus. So as I told you in the first part of the series, to make our markup semantic, we shouldn't skip any headings. We should use these headings to define a proper hierarchy. So if you have an H2 element, we shouldn't jump to an H6 element. It doesn't make sense. So here we're using an H3 for the name of the plan, but we should also give it a class so we can style it in CSS. So if in the future we decide to replace the H3 with, let's say, H4 or something else, our styles are not going to break. So we're going to call this what? Plan _, name. So this is the name element inside the plan component or the plan block. The name element shouldn't exist on its own outside of this block, okay? Next to that, we have a span. I'm going to use the span for applying some styles to our text. This is where we have the price. So I'm going to give this a class of plan _, price. Now let's duplicate this, define another class called billing -cycle. So we're using a hyphen to separate multiple words, but here we have two underscores to separate the block from its element. Great. Now we're going to say /month. Then we have a badge. So we add a span with a few classes: badge, badge -- secondary, and badge -- small. And here we say 10% off. And finally, we add another span with a class of plan _, description. Here we say easy start on the cloud. Here's what we get. It's way off, but don't worry, we're going to make it beautiful, just like the original design. First, I'm going to go back to our markup. Where we set a width of 30%, I'm going to increase this to 50%. So we have more space and our card looks more realistic. Now let's style each of these individual elements. So back to our style sheet, we're going to define a new section called plans. I'm going to define a bunch of rules here. First, for the name, I'm going to set the color to white and margin to 0, because currently we have so much space above the heading. This is coming from the default margin that is applied to H3 elements. So we remove the margin. Now save the changes. Okay, here's what we get. But the font is a little bit too thick. So I'm going to change the weight to 500. And remember, we're using a variable font, so we can use any weight we want without incurring a performance penalty. So now I'll take a look. That is better. Now, if you look at the mobile version, the size of this element is 24 pixels, but our text here is larger. So real quick, it's 30 pixels. So back to our rule, let's set the font size to 2.4 rems. Okay, here's what we get. That is very close to what we have in the original design. Now let's style the price element. So we define a new rule, plan price. We set the font size to 6 rems. Of course, I checked it before recording this video. So let's see what we get. That looks great. Next, we're going to style the billing cycle. So another rule for billing cycle, I'm going to set the font size to 2.4 rems, font weight to 300. I want to make it thinner. Let's take a look. Okay, that's pretty decent. Now let me show you something. Here in Photoshop, if you pay close attention, you can see that the billing cycle is a little bit softer than other text on this page. Why is this happening? Well, we activate the type tool by pressing T. We select this layer. Then on the top, we go to Window, Layers. Now over here, look, the opacity of this layer is set to 80%. So back to our rule, we can set the opacity to 0.8. And here's what we get. It's a little bit softer than before. So we're done here. Now let's work on our badge. The problem we have with the badge is that both the badge and the card are using the same background color, so the badge is lost. So now we should get back to the section where we define the styles for our cards. We're going to define a new rule for secondary cards. If we have a badge, more accurately, a secondary badge inside a secondary card, we want to set the background to, what is the background? Let's grab it real quick. It's this color over here. So let's paste it. Now, anytime we have a secondary card with a secondary badge, the badge is going to look right. Whether that card is used for displaying a plan or something else, it doesn't matter. Let's see what we get. That looks beautiful. Now, there are two issues with the badge. Look at the horizontal spacing. Compare this with what we have in the design mockup. We have less padding here. So we should reduce the horizontal padding for small badges. So we go to the section where we define the styles for our badges. Here's the badge small class. I'm going to change the padding to 0.5 rem for vertical and 1.5 rems for horizontal padding. And now, here's what we get. That's much closer to the original design mockup. But we need to add some spacing here. So back to the rule for the billing cycle. I'm going to apply a right margin of 1 rem. Now take a look. We have clear separation, beautiful. The last thing we need to style in the header is the description. So here we're going to define a new rule, plan description. I'm going to set the font size to 2 rems and font weight to 300 to make it thinner. Now take a look. That looks very close to what we have in our design mockup. But if you pay close attention, we have some space between each letter in the description. Compare this with this text. So here we can apply a letter spacing of 1 pixels. And here's what we get. I think that looks great. Now we're going to replace this dummy text with a list and a button. So back to our markup. Here's the body of the card. Let's remove the text. Now we're going to go to the components folder and grab the template for our lists. This is the benefit of storing these templates in the components folder. Now we can simply copy this entire markup and paste it here. Great. Let's take a look. So here's our list. Now I'm going to pause the recording and change the labels so they match what we have in the design mockup. All right, here's what we have. I think that looks beautiful. The last thing we want to add is the button. So back to our markup. After the list, we're going to add a button with a few classes, BTN, BTN outline, and BTN block. And the label is by now. Take a look. So here's what we have. Now let's compare this list with our design mockup. Can you tell the difference? Let's go back one more time. Look at the space between the letters. In our design mockup, we have more spacing here. So I'm giving you these tips to train your eyes. Your eyes should pay attention to detail. So the first difference is the space between letters. What is the second difference? The vertical space. So compare this with what we have over here. So back to our markup, we have a list inside our plan component. Now we're going to apply a bottom margin to these list items. So back to our style sheet, we define a new rule, plan, list, item. I'm going to set the margin bottom to 2 rems. Now take a look. We have more space and everything looks very close to our design mockup. So we're done here. The next step is to define the styles for wider screens. Because this step is repetitive, I'm going to pause the recording and then review my code with you. So here we have a media query for screens that are wider than 1024 pixels. All I have done here is adjusting the font sizes. So for plan names, we are using 1.4 rems. For plan price, we're using 5 rems. For billing cycle, we're using 1.6 rems. And for description, we're using 1.7 rems. So this is what we see on smaller screens. Now let's see what we get on wider screens. Okay, font sizes adjust properly. The only problem is the description. Because the description is a span element, it's inline, and now that we have extra space, it's coming right after the badge. So I want to make this a block level element. So where we define the rule for plan description, we simply set the display to block. Now the problem is gone. So here's the desktop version, and here's for smaller screens. So our plan component is in pretty good shape. The next thing we want to add is the popular badge on the top. We'll do that next.